Some love stories begin with a promise, others with a sin. He swore to protect his best friend's sister, but fate turned that promise into desire. And that desire into love. The kind of love that defies logic, fear, and the past. If you believe true love can be born from the impossible, this story will prove it. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave a like, and help this story reach even more hearts. And don't forget to hype the video. It helps the channel grow so much. The house felt like it breathed with her. That's what Crystal always said. Not out loud, of course. Things like that were far too sentimental to share with a brother who believed emotions were only acceptable in bad movies. But every morning, when she woke to the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, to the sound of Joshua's steady footsteps in the hallway, and the muffled hum of an old radio playing songs he swore he didn't even like, Crystal felt it. That house, all wide windows and a soul made of comfort, recognized her presence and welcomed it. She walked down the stairs barefoot like she always did, her oversized t-shirt brushing against the cool skin of her thighs. Sunlight slanted across the brick wall of the entryway, and the smell of toasted bread and strong coffee gently pulled her toward the kitchen. Like an invisible embrace. 3 alarms, and you still nearly missed class. Joshua's voice reached her before she even stepped through the doorway. Is that a special skill or just plain laziness? Crystal smiled, still out of sight, but already hearing the familiar sarcasm waiting for her on the other side of the wall. It's not laziness. It's charm, she replied, stepping in. Some people wake up looking good. Others wake up on time. Joshua looked the same as always, black t-shirt, hair slightly tousled by pure negligence, which naturally gave him that effortless magazine editorial kind of attractiveness he never noticed. His eyes were sharp as usual, missing nothing. He handed her a mug without a word, like he'd been rehearsing this sibling morning ritual for years, and sat back down at the counter, where a folded newspaper shared space with a half-eaten bowl of cereal. At this rate, you're going to need a ride from Aiden, he said, not even glancing up. Crystal rolled her eyes and dropped into the chair across from him. That idea again? No thanks. I'd rather be late than deal with that helpless little sister look of his. Joshua laughed. That deep, almost guttural laugh Crystal had loved since she was a kid. It was rare. Joshua was the kind of man who kept his feelings locked away in secret compartments, only showing what was absolutely necessary. But when he really laughed, it felt like the world got a little lighter. Aiden doesn't see you as helpless. He just sees you. That doesn't make it better, you know? On the contrary, most guys see what they want to see. Aiden sees what's really there, and still chooses to stick around. She drank her coffee in silence for a moment, letting that sink in. Joshua had a way of saying a lot with very little. And she knew that line wasn't just about Aiden. It was about him. About everything he had done for her since their parents died. Joshua had been 19 when tragedy shattered their lives, an age where he should have been enjoying college, friends, the carefree years of youth. But he never had that luxury. He worked night shifts to keep the house running, stretched every cent of his scholarship, turned down invitations, locked away dreams, sacrificed weekends and sleep, all so she wouldn't have to feel the weight of what happened. Everyone else disappeared. Except for one Aiden, Joshua's best friend since high school. A bond forged through copied tests, teacher drama, and long afternoons playing basketball on sun-cracked courts. Now 29, Aiden was still the same loyal, sharp-tongued guy Joshua considered a brother, only with more responsibilities, an apartment far too expensive for the neighborhood, and the kind of presence that filled any room. Even when he didn't say a word, Crystal looked at her brother with a soft smile, stripped of sarcasm. One of those rare ones that only show up when gratitude overflows and can't find any other way out. You know you exaggerate, right? She said, setting her mug down. I'm an adult now. I can take care of myself. You can, Joshua replied, lifting his own cup. But don't forget, there are still people who want to take care of you. Her expression softened, and for a second, time paused right there. In the kitchen's quiet comfort with the scent of fresh coffee in the air, and the gaze of a brother who never promised her the world, but gave her everything he could with his own 2 hands. She stood up a bit abruptly, leaving her coffee behind on the table, already cooling. I have class at 8. Is it going to rain today? Take the umbrella, Crystal. She rolled her eyes as if his comment had been more stubbornness than actual foresight. But he was always right. She grabbed her backpack, kissed him on the cheek, and walked out the door just like she did every morning. Earbuds in, heart light. Because for now at least, there was still a home waiting for her when she returned. The week passed like a slow-motion movie. Classes, scribbled notes in colorful notebooks, coffee gulped down in a rush, laughs exchanged over text messages, rain that came and went without warning, and behind it all, Joshua's steady presence, as solid as the ground beneath her feet. Even when the world felt like it was slipping, she loved Sundays. Not for the obvious reasons, rest, laziness, catching up on shows, but because Sunday meant ritual. The day Aiden would show up without knocking, looking grumpy in an old sweatshirt, holding a bag of donuts like he wasn't the most sought-after architect at the firm he helped build. He walked in like he belonged there, flopped onto the couch like he lived there, and yelled from the living room, "Someone feed me or I'll die right here." Crystal already knew how it would go. The couch would turn into contested territory. Joshua would grumble about street shoes on the coffee table, and the two of them would spend hours debating. Everything from politics to football, as if each opinion needed the other's stubbornness to exist. She watched it all with the quiet affection of someone who had long accepted they were two parts of the same whole. Joshua was structure, Aiden, instinct. One calculated, the other created. And despite their vastly different personalities, they somehow fit, like pillars holding up the same house. And in a way, that's exactly what they were. The house that kept Crystal grounded in the world. In that space, everything felt right. Crystal watched them like someone rewatching a familiar film, one she knew by heart, but never grew tired of. Joshua, the practical one, grumpy on the outside. Aiden, the sarcastic one, polished, almost always wearing a look that hovered between boredom and curiosity. They were complementary opposites, which explained how they'd stuck together since their teenage years. "You two make a very weird couple," she teased, laughing as she placed coffee on the table. "Couple?" Aiden raised an eyebrow. "I'm the handsome, creative, intelligent one. Your brother's just the clingy guy who won't leave me alone. You know what that is," Joshua replied, flipping open the newspaper. "Jealousy of my beard." Crystal laughed, and they continued their verbal dance, the kind only possible after years of knowing each other's rhythms. It wasn't just familiarity, it was real affection, the kind that lives in small gestures and unspoken understanding. She loved that. Watching men be like that, loyal, present. Maybe that's why she'd never fallen madly in love. No one ever came close to that kind of bond. Joshua was a civil engineer. He worked on public infrastructure, the kind of work people barely noticed, until the day it collapsed. He was methodical, ethical to the point of annoying his supervisors, and had a strange passion for impossible projects. He used to say he liked building big things with solid foundations. Crystal always thought that line sounded suspiciously philosophical. Aiden, on the other hand, was an architect, and he made no secret of the pride he took in designing things that made people's eyes light up. He had a refined aesthetic, expensive taste, and a constant restlessness that showed in the way he swapped ideas like changing clothes. But despite what people assumed, he was more introspective than seductive, reserved, sometimes to a fault. Crystal was different from both of them. At 19, she was studying interior design, but it wasn't the major that defined her. It was her gaze, the way she looked at people, at spaces, at possibilities, as if she were always reimagining everything around her. She had a sweet personality, but a steady posture. She knew how to provoke with class, ask disarming questions, and smile without explaining herself. She liked bright spaces, loud music when she was alone, and little details, like scented candles and mugs that matched her mood of the day. She still carried something of a girl in her, not out of naivety, but because she'd been loved so fiercely, she never had to harden. That night, Joshua was sitting on the porch, a beer bottle resting on the railing, eyes fixed on the sky. Crystal arrived without a sound, sat beside him, didn't say a word for long seconds. "Are you okay?" He took a moment to answer. Today makes 11 years, Crystal. She knew instantly what he meant. 11 years since the accident. Since the night their parents went out to dinner and never came back. A stupid crash, drunk driver, a cold phone call in the middle of the night. And after that, the world in pieces, I know, she whispered. I remember the date too. Joshua turned his head slowly. There was a quiet kind of weariness in his eyes, the kind that isn't weakness but inheritance. He slipped his arm around her and pulled her close. The hug was strong, protective, the kind of hug that heals. I'm sorry I don't always know what to do, he said. You saved me, Joshua. He didn't reply. But she felt it, felt the squeeze grow tighter, felt his chest rise and fall slowly, as if breathing itself was a reminder that they were still here, alive. You know what tomorrow is? He asked, his tone shifting. Monday? Yes, but also the day of your internship interview. That interior design studio you haven't shut up about for weeks. Crystal sighed with a half smile and shrugged, trying to hide the flutter in her stomach. Terrified. That's the word. Fear is good. Fear means it matters. She looked at him with raw admiration. There was so much she could have said, but instead she just rested her head on his shoulder and let the wind say the rest. The next morning, the house was just as always, alive, filled with the scent of coffee drifting through the halls, and the muffled hum of the old radio playing something Joshua pretended not to like. Crystal woke slowly, slipped on her slippers in that same familiar motion, and made her way to the kitchen like it was a sacred ritual. Joshua was already up, leaning against the counter, stirring his coffee like it was the most important thing in the world. Guess what's falling from the sky today? He said, not turning around. Blessings or storms? She replied, grabbing her favorite mug from the cabinet. Both, take the umbrella, she laughed. Same old warning, same old stubbornness, and yet, she took it. That morning, the world still made sense. They still argued over who burned the toast, still mocked each other's playlists, still treated silly things like they were urgent. Crystal didn't know, and didn't need to know, that moments like these, the simple, ordinary, lukewarm ones, are the ones we miss most when they're gone. But at that time, nothing had changed, and for now that was enough. The late afternoon arrived bathed in gold, the kind that made rooftops look warm from the inside out. Crystal was upstairs, reorganizing boxes filled with little objects she swore she'd never throw away, as if every movie ticket and folded letter could somehow hold time still. Downstairs on the porch, two voices mixed with the sound of a beer being opened. You always pick the bitterest one, Aiden said, making a face as he rolled the bottle in his hand. And you always complain, but never say no. Joshua leaned back in the wooden armchair like someone who knew exactly where he belonged. Their friendship was old enough that conversations didn't need beginnings. They didn't need context. They didn't need effort. They just met wherever they happened to be. I'm 30, Aiden said, running a hand over his face like the weight of age had landed on him all at once. 29, Joshua corrected, smirking slightly. Don't steal my years. I'm the only one turning 30 here. Aiden shrugged, laughing lazily. He wore a gray hoodie, his hair a bit more tousled than usual, like he'd just come out of an all-nighter of project work. Joshua, on the other hand, wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up and that calm look in his eyes. But Aiden could see the weight behind it, a silence packed with meaning. Thinking about your parents? Aiden asked, straight to the point. Joshua took a deep breath, the kind that tries to push a memory away but only brings it closer. Always, especially this time of year. But it's not just that, Aiden waited. He was good at that. He didn't push. He left space. It's Crystal, Joshua continued. She's growing up, stepping out into the world, taking cabs alone, buying overpriced coffee, picking mugs with ridiculous quotes. That's youth, isn't it? Stupid mugs. Joshua let out a short laugh, the kind that tries to hide something deeper. I look at her and I feel torn. Part of me wants to see her fly. The other wants to hold back time. You know she's strong, right? I do, because she had to be. But she's still just a girl, Aiden, and I'm all she's got. Aiden turned his face toward the sky, now darkening into a deeper blue. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, thoughtful. She's got me too. Joshua looked at his friend, not surprised. but quietly relieved. I know. They sat there, the two of them, drinking bitter beer and watching the sky change colors. It was one of those moments that didn't need music or pretty words, just presence. You know, I never thanked you, Joshua said, voice lower, for staying. When everything fell apart, you could have walked away, but you didn't. I'm not the kind that walks away, Aiden said, his tone dry, but his eyes said something else. And when I thought I couldn't handle it, it was you who showed up. At the hospital, at the funeral, at the house. When I'd wake up not knowing how to feed an 8-year-old girl, you'd show up with pizza, and you didn't say anything. You just stayed. And that was everything. Aiden looked away. Grabbed another beer even though he wasn't thirsty. You don't need to thank me. Crystal's your sister. But she's part of my life too, Joshua nodded. There was so much love in that moment, between two men who respected each other deeply, that even the wind seemed to slow. If one day I'm not here, Joshua began, don't start. I want you to promise you'll take care of her. Aiden was silent for a moment, then looked him in the eye. I already do, Josh. I always have. Later that night, back inside the house, Joshua stopped outside Crystal's bedroom door and knocked twice before walking in. She was lying on her back, phone resting on her chest, a playlist playing softly in the background. You alive in there? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Surviving the anxiety, she answered without opening her eyes. He walked in, sat at the edge of the bed, and just stared at the ceiling with her. Remember the night I let you sleep in my room because you thought there was a monster in your closet? She laughed, opening her eyes. I was 5. And you put your school backpack in front of the door like that would protect me. It was a heavy backpack, had calculus books in it. You were 15, and afraid of horror movies. I had to look brave for you, he smiled. You were so small, and still, so stubborn. She turned her face toward him, the smile fading a little. I grew up too fast. Life forced you to, but you handled it better than I did. Crystal sat up in bed, crossing her legs. Her face turned more serious now, as if this conversation had a sacred place inside her. Joshua. I've never said this properly, but we're everything. Father, brother, safe place, and I don't even know what life would have been without you. He reached out and took her hand, holding it tight. You're the best part of my life, Crystal. Her eyes welled up, but she held it in. It wasn't the time to cry. It was the time to feel. You're the one place in this world that has always felt safe to me, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here. Hey, he interrupted softly. I'm here now. And that's enough. The night passed like a long embrace. Aiden ended up staying for dinner. The three of them cooked together, or at least tried. Aiden chopped vegetables like he was carving wood. Crystal laughed at Joshua's failed attempts to season the rice, and in the end, they ordered pizza. They laughed, talked nonsense, argued over an old movie Joshua swore was overrated. Crystal laid on the couch, feet crossed over Aiden's legs. Joshua snapped a photo of the scene, tweeted that without them noticing. Family. He typed it into his phone's notes. Later, after the house had fallen asleep, Crystal stayed awake a few more minutes, listening to the distant sound of laughter still echoing in the walls. And she thought that was what made a house a home. The next morning, the house was quieter than usual. The smell of coffee arrived later. Joshua's footsteps took longer to echo down the hallway. Crystal felt a strange tightness in her chest, like something was about to shift, like that calmness carried a hidden farewell inside it. But in that moment, she didn't know. She didn't know it was their last breakfast together, the last piece of advice, the last laugh, the last, take the umbrella, it's going to rain. She didn't know that fate was already on its way, brakes gone, and that the next words she'd hear about her brother would come from another man with eyes full of grief and guilt. But that was the beginning of the after, and for now, they were still together, and everything felt eternal. The morning began like every other morning, and that was the first blow. Crystal came down the stairs, hair tied up haphazardly, a slice of bread between her fingers, and her bag slipping off one shoulder. Joshua was already in the kitchen, standing by the stove, stirring his coffee with that confident air of someone who ruled the world simply by knowing the exact moment before it boiled. You're going without a jacket? he asked without looking up. I am. It's warm out. And the forecast? Rain only at night, he raised an eyebrow, mocking. Crystal, you never get the forecast right. She grabbed the mug from his hand, took a hot sip, and blinked playfully. Maybe today's the day I do. Joshua smiled, picking up his keys from the counter. I have to head to the next town. Site inspection. Might be back late, Crystal nodded. That was normal. Quick trips, technical visits, checkups. Joshua wasn't the kind to make a fuss about being away. Maybe because his presence had become so constant. No one ever doubted it anymore. If you're back after 9, text me, she said, already heading for the door. Hey, it's going to rain. Take the umbrella. I knew it. She left laughing, turning back to give him that look, the one that said, you know me too well. And he did. Maybe that's why it was so hard to accept what came next. The afternoon dragged on. The day until then had been just like any other. Crystal stopped by the corner cafe, scribbled ideas on a napkin, laughed at a classmate's text, lost track of time during her practical class, and apologized with that light-hearted charm that only she could pull off. When the rain arrived, earlier than expected, she just thought of Joshua with that sarcastic tone of his, the one that always meant I told you so, but she had no idea. She couldn't. While she folded her wet umbrella and brushed the sleeve of her new coat, a siren wailed somewhere across town. While she opened her front door, still laughing at the old song playing through her headphones, a phone rang on the other side of the city. While she reheated dinner, distractedly choosing what series to watch, a name was spoken by a police officer. Softly, carefully. Joshua. Accident. Rain. No chance. Aiden knew first. His name was listed as the emergency contact. The call came at 7:47 p.m. The time between hearing and understanding took seconds. The time between understanding and feeling took nothing. He parked in front of the house, unable to breathe. The car window fogged, his hand still gripping the steering wheel, his mind collapsing. He climbed the 3 porch steps like a man carrying a body inside his own. Crystal opened the door with a smile. Aiden didn't speak. She didn't know yet, but something in her sensed it. Hey, she started looking at his face. His tear-filled eyes, the unbearable silence between them. He tried, breathed, swallowed hard, grounded himself with both feet on the floor. Crystal. She didn't let him finish. Something in his voice already said it all. The smile fell from her lips. Her eyes searched for a confirmation he didn't want to give. And the world faltered beneath her feet. What happened? Josh, that was all it took. His name, spoken with that tone. That pause. That pain. Crystal stumbled backward as if struck. Her hands went to her face, then her chest, then to nothing. There was nothing to hold on to. Nowhere left to stand. Aiden caught her before she fell. His arms wrapped around her like walls, but even that wasn't enough to contain the collapse. No, she repeated between sobs. No. You're wrong, no. But Aiden wasn't, and Crystal knew it. Even before she heard it, even before she understood it. Her body already knew. Aiden shut his eyes tight, arms still locked around her, trying to hold not just her, but the entire world crumbling between them. I'm so sorry. Crystal, she screamed, not out of anger, not out of despair. It was a sound that came from somewhere deep inside, a sound without name or shape, a sound that only exists when life does something it never should have done. The pain didn't explode. It imploded, from within, without warning. Time after that stopped being time. Crystal sat on the couch but couldn't feel her own weight. Aiden knelt in front of her, as if he wanted to say something, but nothing made sense anymore. She didn't cry like in the movies. There were no neat tears, no whispered lines, just numbness, a hollow coldness too vast to fit anywhere. He promised me, she murmured, staring into nothing. He said he'd come back. He always comes back. Aiden took her hands in his as if that could keep her from shattering completely. I know. He was everything I had, she said, her voice breaking apart in pieces. It was him. Always him. He knew that. He knew. He raised me. He saved me. Her voice vanished, strangled by a pain that pressed her throat like an invisible hand. He loved me so much. And I didn't even tell him I loved him this morning. I just joked. I walked away without looking back. Aiden felt something inside him break. Not with a crack, but slowly. Crystal, listen to me. He knew. Joshua knew. She shook her head as if trying to hide from a truth that had already found her. He was the only good thing in my life. And now, Aiden pulled her into his chest, tight, without restraint. The way Joshua would have. And there, in that silent room, with the rain still tapping against the windows like a whispered lament, two broken worlds held onto each other. Aiden cried, not loudly, but completely. For Joshua, for Crystal, for what he couldn't stop from happening. Hours later, the house was dark. Crystal sat on the bedroom floor, wrapped in a blanket. The door open, the hallway empty. She didn't know how to go on. Or if she even wanted to. Aiden stood outside, leaning against the wall, his hands covering his face, fighting against his own despair. He'd lost someone too. He was drowning too, but now, it wasn't about him. He had to be the anchor. The safe harbor, time lost its name. It wasn't Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday anymore. It was simply, during the first 2 days, Crystal barely spoke. She moved through the house like someone walking across unfamiliar ground, hands trembling too much to hold a cup, eyes too dry to cry again. She sat in the places Joshua used to be, the corner of the porch, the head of the table, the doorway to the garage, as if his presence could still be heard in the creak of the wood or smelled in the shirt he'd left draped over a chair. Aiden tried to keep the house running. He made calls, filled out paperwork, answered the phone when it rang. And every time he said Joshua's name, the pain took on a new shape, more real, more absurd. By Thursday, the body was released. The funeral would be held Friday. For 3 days, Crystal barely ate. She slept in fragments, woke in jolts, dreamed of Joshua still being there, laughing, teasing, giving advice about bad coffee or warning her about rain. And every time she woke, came the punch to the gut. The world from before no longer existed. On the morning of the funeral, Aiden made coffee, automatically. Not because he wanted to drink it, but because Joshua had done it every single day. It was a quiet way to keep a habit alive, one that had already turned into absence. Crystal appeared at the top of the stairs, pale, eyes sunken. She wore her brother's hoodie, the gray one with the crumpled hood, and his scent still trapped in the fabric. Aiden said nothing. He just looked at her. She sat at the table and stayed there, in silence, as if waiting for someone to show up. What do I do with all the things he left here? She whispered. Aiden thought of 100 answers, but none were enough, for now. Nothing. What do you mean? For now, we just breathe and try not to fall. Crystal stared at her cup for a long time, then whispered, I don't know who I am without him anymore, and that hurt Aiden more than anything, because he knew exactly what that felt like. The funeral hall felt too cold. Aiden had asked that it not be held in a church. Joshua never liked religious formalities. He preferred open spaces, places with windows where the wind could come in without asking permission. Crystal arrived by his side. People looked. Some approached with hesitant hugs, empty words, and awkward eyes. But she didn't hear them. Everything was noise. Everything was shadow. The casket was closed. The rain from the past few days had done too much damage. She didn't want to see. Didn't need to. She knew who he was. And now she had to learn how to go on without him. She sat in the front row. Aiden beside her. Their hands brushed for an instant. Not on purpose, not in search of anything. Just the brief touch of two souls trying to keep from sinking. A distant cousin gave a speech. A college classmate of Joshua's read something she had written. But none of it felt real. Crystal wanted to speak. But she didn't know if she could. Aiden noticed. Do you want me to go with you? He asked quietly. She nodded. And they walked up together, standing in front of everyone. Crystal held the microphone in trembling hands. She took a deep breath. Her voice came out soft, but every word carried love. Joshua was everything. He was my brother, my protector, my best friend. He became a father when no one else could. He was comfort when everything felt lost. He was my home. Aiden, standing beside her, gently squeezed her shoulder. Crystal went on, tears silently sliding down her cheeks. He taught me how to laugh again. Taught me to be strong without losing my sweetness. To fight without shutting down my feelings. And now, everything feels so dark. She paused. Her voice cracked. But I promise, Josh, I will keep going. For you. Aiden took the microphone and said only one sentence. I love you, my brother. And I promise to take care of Crystal for you. On the way home, she didn't want to talk. She lay down in his room, held his pillow, and cried everything she hadn't been able to cry during the day. Aiden sat outside her door for hours. Later, when she finally came out, her eyes were swollen, but her body looked a little less tense. She found him on the porch. It was dark. The wind blew strong. You think he knew? She asked. Knew what? How much he was loved. Aiden looked up at the sky. Joshua didn't need to be told. He felt it. In the way you argued with him. In the coffee you made wrong just to annoy him. In the look you gave when he took the jokes too far. He knew, Crystal. He always knew. She sat beside him. And you? Are you okay? Aiden gave a small smile, but there was no joy in it. No, but I will be. Crystal looked at him, like someone watching another person slowly drown but trying to stay on their feet. For someone else. You're trying to be strong for me? I'm trying to be strong for him. She said nothing, just rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time since that day, she closed her eyes for a few minutes. It wasn't peace, but it was a beginning. The first night, Crystal didn't sleep. The second night, she slept from sheer exhaustion. The third, she woke up in the middle of the night calling her brother's name, as if he were still in the room next door. Aiden heard it all. From the guest room, he heard the soft steps on the stairs, the creak of the door, the quiet hum of the TV playing on volume 1. But he didn't say anything. He knew grief demanded silence, before it ever asked for comfort. On the fourth day, he left a cup of tea on the living room table, with a note in his steady handwriting. You don't have to talk. You just have to keep going. Crystal didn't reply, but she drank the tea. She was the one who asked him to stay. He didn't have to ask. She didn't need to explain. After the funeral, when everyone else had gone, Crystal simply looked at Aiden, with the eyes of someone who'd lost the entire world, and said, Stay? And he stayed. The first few days were heavy. They didn't talk much. She avoided the corners of the house where Joshua used to sit. Aiden avoided intruding on her routines, but he cleaned the kitchen, did the laundry, ran to the store when things ran out. He didn't do it to feel useful. He did it because it's what Joshua would have done, because he had made a promise. And Aiden was the kind of man who kept promises, even with a heart in pieces. Time began to move slowly. The weeks passed like a faded calendar. Crystal returned to university, but without urgency. Sometimes she attended classes. Other times she just sat in the library, watching people as if they belonged to another reality. She came home in the late afternoon, kicked off her shoes in the hallway, hung her coat on the wrong hook, Joshua's, and let out a sigh Aiden could recognize from a mile away. He had learned how to read her sighs. One meant, I'm tired. Another said, I'm trying. And then there was the one that simply whispered, I'm here even if I don't know how. Their coexistence was strangely gentle. Aiden didn't ask too much. Crystal didn't try to explain what she felt. But they began to notice each other in the small things. She learned he preferred his toast less crispy. He learned she didn't like to talk before 9 a.m. She started putting the dishes away the way he liked. He began folding the couch blankets the way she folded them. You're not going to bed? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. He glanced sideways, offering a tired half-smile. Sometimes, the night feels like the only place where the absence makes sense. Crystal sat beside him in silence. The cool breeze passed between them, a quiet reminder that something had changed forever. And yet at the same time, something was being born. I still wait to hear his car pull up, she confessed, her voice raspy. So do I. The house feels different, doesn't it? It does. It feels bigger. Because there's too much missing inside it. Crystal closed her eyes and leaned her head against the wooden back of the chair. And there, for long minutes, they just sat. No need to explain anything, and with time, small routines began to form. Aiden left early, but always made sure the coffee was ready. Crystal cooked dinner twice a week. He stuck motivational quotes on the fridge, absurdly cheesy ones. She answered with sarcastic post-its. You're amazing. But your handwriting still sucks. She started laughing again. Not much, but she started. One afternoon, while reorganizing a shelf, Crystal found a box filled with old photos. Teenage Joshua, Aiden with braces. Her a tiny holding an ice cream cone bigger than her face. She laughed. For real? Aiden heard and came to see. You with bangs is my new wallpaper, he said, holding the photo with theatrical flair. Don't you dare. I dare. I'm the guardian of this family now. I have privileges. Guardian means you try, not that you give orders. I see I'm going to need reinforcements, she looked at him. And for a moment, she didn't see her brother's best friend. She saw a man who was there, present, constant, kind. And she felt guilty for thinking that way. So she looked away. Some days, grief came back like a wave. Crystal cried in the shower. Aiden broke a glass by accident. She screamed into her pillow. He slammed the car door a little too hard, but then they had dinner, laughed at stupid jokes, watched bad movies just to make fun of them later, shared the silence. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, she was folding laundry in her room. Aiden passed by the doorway and paused, his face calm. You know, Josh talked about you all the time when you weren't around. Crystal looked up. He did? He said you were stubborn, but brilliant. That you had a heart that felt more than it could hold, and that if he was ever gone, you'd still be light, even in the dark. She bit her lip. Her eyes filled. I just want one more conversation with him. So do I. One last argument. One last bad joke. One last, take the umbrella. They smiled together, and it was beautiful. Not light, but beautiful. The months went by. The house took on new smells, new rhythms, new silences, but it also gained new laughter, new conversations, new rituals. Crystal still talked about Joshua. Aiden still glanced at the door like it might open again. But they were living, one day at a time, no rush. No promises, just presence. That night, Aiden was doing the dishes when Crystal appeared at the kitchen door, wearing one of Joshua's old t-shirts, the one both of them had loved most. What are you doing? She asked, conquering the world. But at the moment, scrubbing a plate, she laughed, leaning against the counter. You know what I realized? That I'm the best cook in this house? That we're becoming a weird little family. Aiden looked at her, with that kind of gaze full of care and irony. That only comes from men who've already learned that affection doesn't need to be dramatic. The best kind of family, he said. Crystal lowered her eyes, took a deep breath, then smiled. A small smile, but a real one. And just like that, and in the details, in the days, in the quiet exchanges, the bond between them began to form. It was care. It was space. It was home without Joshua, but with everything he had left behind between them. A year and a half had passed since the tragedy that took Joshua too soon. It was strange thinking of time that way, as if life could be measured by the distance from a loss. But it was inevitable. Every small milestone was counted from the after the funeral, after Joshua's last joke, after the day Aiden stayed. Without a word. Now the house didn't feel so hollow. There was still absence, but no longer a void. The walls once again held laughter, even if brief. The smell of coffee returned to fill the kitchen, and the sound of late-night porch conversations, now between two, had become a ritual as comforting as the routines that held the days together. Crystal had adapted. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She began taking better care of the house, went back to design school with more focus, started going out with classmates, experimenting with her hair color, trying new recipes in the kitchen, and laughing at herself when she burned the sauce, as if teasing someone who was no longer there. And Aiden remained constant. His presence was never overbearing, never forced. He took up space the way someone offers, never demands. He was the kind of man who folded a sweater left on the couch without complaining, who washed the dishes but forgot to put the glasses away, who listened, really listened, and only gave his opinion when he knew it would be welcome. It was the quiet way he cared that surprised her most. One night they were playing cards in the living room, both wearing socks, warm mugs of tea in their hands. Crystal had her feet propped on his lap without hesitation, and he didn't mind, even while teasing her about the color of her socks. You think I'm hard to deal with? she asked suddenly, shuffling the cards. Aiden looked at her with a thoughtful expression. Hard how? To live with or to figure out? Both. You're challenging, but not complicated, she raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment or a politely disguised insult? A compliment. Any man who thinks you're too complicated is the wrong man. Crystal looked away for a second, went back to shuffling the cards. There's this guy at school, she said casually. Aiden pushed his cards forward, alert. And he's cute, smart, nice, the kind who picks up on signals. Is that a good thing or a dangerous one? She smiled. Depends on the day. And do you like him? I'm not sure yet. But he looks at me like he already does. Aiden let out a small, muffled laugh, but his eyes lingered on the cards a bit too long. Something inside him tightened, not pain, just a strange discomfort. Quick, almost imperceptible. He took a sip of tea and replied, Then watch your step. Crystal let out a short laugh. You're terrible with relationship advice, and you're great at getting yourself into trouble. She threw a pillow at him. He let it hit. 2 months later, Aiden walked into the kitchen on a Saturday morning with a different smile. He wore a navy blue shirt, his beard neatly trimmed, and sneakers far too clean. Crystal looked him up and down. Don't tell me it's coffee with your mom. Close brunch with someone who has a name. Jessica. She leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. Never heard of her. Met her during a meeting at the office, architect, creative, made me laugh with a joke about concrete. I have to respect that. Crystal made a mock grimace. You actually have the nerve to go out with someone who makes concrete jokes? You once dated a guy who wore sweatpants during the first week of class. Ouch, sensitive spot. Extremely. Jessica entered their lives like someone who knew how to enter. Light, charming, good-humored. She had that kind of easy energy that didn't ask for space. It simply created it. It was obvious Aiden liked her. Crystal noticed the way he leaned in when Jessica spoke. The looser laugh, the restless hands, the new light in his eyes, and Crystal liked Jessica. It was impossible not to. But there was a part of her that pulled back. Not out of jealousy, but because of something she couldn't name. The time shared between the three of them became occasional. Sometimes Jessica had dinner with them. Sometimes she didn't. When she was there, she was kind. When she wasn't, the air shifted, like the house returned to the balance they had known before her. On a random Sunday, Crystal and Aiden were doing the dishes together. He washed, she dried. Jessica had left a few minutes earlier, and what remained was a comfortable silence, the kind that only settles between people who've shared a home long enough to understand each other's quiet. You like her? Crystal asked, not looking up. I do, Aiden answered, rinsing a plate, but it doesn't feel easy. It is easy, just a different kind of easy. What kind? He thought for a moment before answering. The kind that doesn't pull you under, but it doesn't pull you in either. Crystal looked at him for a moment, then went back to drying the dish. I think you miss being pulled in. He turned slightly, eyes fixed on her. He didn't say a word, but the discomfort returned. And this time, it didn't leave so easily. Aiden realized something was shifting when he couldn't stop looking at her hands. It was just an ordinary day, a Tuesday late afternoon. Crystal was in the kitchen, talking about a school project, gesturing as she chopped vegetables for a soup that would probably end up too salty. She wore an oversized t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun, no makeup, and yet, maybe because of that, Aiden had to leave the kitchen for a minute, because those hands, that bun, that effortless way she moved, were starting to get to him in a way they shouldn't. He leaned against the hallway wall and closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Again, it wasn't desire, not yet. But it wasn't just care either. It was the feeling of wanting to protect something that was already safe, of staying alert for no reason, of getting irritated when she talked about another guy, even if that guy hadn't done anything wrong. That night he told her he was going to bed early. It was a lie. He stayed in his room, lying in the dark, listening to the soft music playing from hers, a mellow playlist with names he'd never heard before, but now knew by heart. And when the music stopped, when the house finally fell asleep, Aiden stayed awake. Jessica began to notice. Not because Aiden treated her poorly. He was kind, present, respectful. But some days, he felt distant, like he was working through something inside himself, "Are we okay?" she asked one night while they were hanging out at her apartment. Aiden looked up from his book. "Of course we are. Why?" "Because some days it feels like you're with me. But your mind isn't." He closed the book, sat up straighter. "Jessica, I like you. A lot. But..." He hesitated. "But I think there are things inside me I still haven't figured out. And I don't want to pull you into something confusing." Jessica looked at him with maturity, not with hurt, but with clarity. "You already are, Aiden. The only difference is, you haven't had the courage to say it out loud." He ran a hand through his hair. Frustrated with himself, "Is it Crystal?" she asked directly. He didn't confirm, but he didn't deny it either. Jessica took a deep breath, offering a melancholy smile. "It's okay. You're not the first man to fall for the one thing he still feels like he can protect. And her. Well, she has a light that draws people in. I saw it." Aiden lowered his head. "I never tried anything. Never even thought..." "I know," she cut in. "But feelings don't ask permission. They just show up." Jessica didn't cry. She simply touched his face gently and said, "When you understand what you feel, let me know. But don't leave me on standby just because you're afraid to face it." A few days later, Aiden was on the porch, working on a report on his laptop. When Crystal came home from the store, she was carrying too many bags. Her hair loose, and she laughed freely into her phone. Talking to someone from school, Aiden watched her through the window. He didn't like the smile. Or rather, he didn't like what the smile did to him. He had no right to feel jealous. But he did. It was the kind of emotion he usually despised in other men. Irrational, possessive, unfair. And yet, there he was. Jaw clenched, chest burning. Crystal walked into the kitchen still laughing. When she saw him, she smiled. "I bought pistachio ice cream. Your favorite. But if you say you don't want to share, we're going to have a problem." Aiden forced a smile. "We've argued over less." She placed the bags on the counter and started putting the groceries away. He followed. He just wanted to be close, even if he didn't know what to do with that. "You're different today," she said without looking. "What do you mean?" A little tense. "Something happened?" "Just work." Crystal turned to face him now, looking into his eyes. "Work? Or Jessica?" Aiden met her gaze. She raised her eyebrows and challenging. "Am I wrong?" He looked away. "I'm trying to figure a few things out. Want to talk about it?" "Not yet." He took a slow breath. "But thanks for asking." She studied him a moment longer than necessary, then went back to the ice cream. But something in the air between them had shifted. A Saturday later, they were organizing boxes in the attic. Books, old photos, Joshua's belongings, an emotional exercise in courage, one they'd decided to face together. Crystal found a box with old DVDs, broken headphones, and a worn-out scarf. This was his, she said. Holding the fabric, Aiden took it carefully. He used to wear it in winter, even when it wasn't cold, just because he liked the smell of the laundry. She laughed, tears rising in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready to give any of this away." "Then don't. Leave it here." "But if I leave it, I'll have to remember." "Remembering isn't the problem, Crystal. Forgetting would be." She bit her lip, trying to hold the tears back. Aiden stepped closer and slowly placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm here." And she, without thinking, turned and hugged him. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just comfort. There was a moment, brief but real, where their bodies recognized something. Fit together in a new way. His heart raced. So did hers. They let go too quickly, looked in opposite directions. "Let's keep going," she said, reaching for another box. Aiden just nodded, but the box in his hands was shaking. That night, Aiden went out for a walk, alone. He needed to think. The problem wasn't what he felt. The problem was what to do with it. He had promised to take care of her, to protect her, to be a safe place. But now he wanted more. And was that betrayal? Not of Joshua, but of what? He'd promised himself? He looked up at the city's dark sky, starless, street lamps casting long shadows across the sidewalk. He remembered Jessica's words, You're not the first man to fall for the only thing he still feels he can protect. Maybe that was it. Or maybe it was something deeper. But whatever it was real, and he couldn't deny it anymore. 2 days later, Crystal walked into his room without knocking, like she always did, asking about a book he'd lent her. Aiden was at the computer, finishing a report. "Third shelf," he said. On the bookcase. She searched, found it, but before leaving, she stopped at the door. "Are we okay?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course, why? I don't know. You've been off, a little quieter, a little more distant." He looked at her. It took a moment. Then he said, "There are things changing inside me, and I'm still trying to understand them. But it's never about pulling away from you." Crystal swallowed hard. "Promise, I promise." She nodded, gave a faint smile. "Good night, Aiden." "Good night, Crystal." But neither of them slept well that night, and maybe it was only the beginning. Aiden parked in front of Jessica's building, the engine still running, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. It wasn't hesitation. The decision had been made days ago, maybe weeks. What weighed on him now was the awareness of what would come next. Broken hearts don't make noise when they crack. They just leave silence, where laughter used to live. He turned off the car, grabbed his jacket from the back seat, and climbed the 2 flights of stairs to her apartment. He didn't bring flowers. No apologies. Just the truth. And that on its own was already too heavy. Jessica opened the door with a smile that faded before it ever fully formed. She knew that look. The same one he wore when he drifted off in thought, even while physically present. A distance she'd felt for months but refused to name. "Hey," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I thought you were coming tomorrow." Aiden walked in slowly, like each step forward required an inner strength not to turn back. "I needed to talk to you." Jessica nodded. "Close the door." The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. She walked to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, but didn't drink. She just held it, a transparent shield against the inevitable. "You're breaking up with me," she said. No fluff. Aiden met her gaze. There was nothing cruel in his expression, but no hesitation either, yes. Jessica didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't ask him to stay, and somehow, that hurt more than any pleading ever could have. She simply crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe, and spoke with the serenity of someone who had known it all along. It was always her, wasn't it? Aiden looked away. Her apartment, filled with the scent of lavender and reheated coffee, felt smaller that night. The perfectly aligned throw pillows, the matching mugs on the counter, all those things meant to signal comfort, now felt like a polite goodbye. "I never had anything with Crystal," he said quietly. Directly, as if needing at the very least to keep that part clean. "But you feel something for her," Jessica finished. She wasn't asking. She was stating it, like someone naming the obvious, finally letting it take shape out loud. Jessica was an architect, good with straight lines, defined angles, and clean layouts. But she loved Aiden the way one survives messy sketches, through the chaos that can't be explained. And now, it was time to step away. "You're a good man, Aiden, you just never learned how to love me." He didn't know what to say. Didn't even try, and he left. Time, that traitor dressed up as a teacher, moved on in the following months with cruel precision. Crystal was 23 now. In her final year of college, university had left its marks. Dark circles from sleepless nights, scars from failed flings, a quiet maturity in her eyes. The kind only those who've lost something big know how to carry. Aiden was still by her side. Not as someone who intrudes, but as someone who remains. He woke up early, helped care for the house, handled bills, tracked deadlines, and on Saturdays sometimes, he'd wait outside her class with coffee and 2 muffins. Blueberry for her, banana cinnamon for him. You do realize I'm never going to accept that banana muffin as the superior option, right? She'd tease. "The moral superiority of blueberry is highly overrated," he'd reply. Dry. With that almost smile she'd learned how to read. No one talked about Joshua, not because it was forbidden, but because they had carried that grief too deeply for too long, and remembering still hurt. Now, they were building something new, made of late-night conversations, improvised dinners, and fleeting touches that lingered too long on shoulders, backs. Hands and Crystal started to notice. In the way Aiden looked at her when she laughed, in how quickly he turned away when her eyes held his for just a second too long. On a spring afternoon, the porch was drenched in golden light. Crystal appeared barefoot, hair down, wearing a light dress. "The professor asked us to write about what we've learned about love," she said, no preamble. Aiden lowered the newspaper. He was lying in the hammock, wearing a dark shirt, reading glasses sliding down his nose. A large man, weighted by memories with a quietness that bordered on insolence. But next to her, something in him softened, became more human. "And what did you write?" he asked. "That love hurts," she said. "But the worst is when it confuses." He raised an eyebrow. Not because he disagreed, but because he knew exactly where that was going. "Is there someone you want to talk about?" "I want to talk about you," Crystal replied with a bluntness that thickened the air between them. She didn't smile, didn't try to soften it. She just continued, "You became everything, Aiden, my shoulder, my shelter, my ground. I trust you more than I've trusted any other man in my life. And I need to understand what's happening here, Crystal." He started, already shifting, already folding the newspaper with tension, like someone trying to contain the inevitable. "Don't tell me you don't feel it," she cut in. "I see it. In your eyes. In your care. In the way you pull away when I get too close, I know. You feel it too." Aiden stood up, and for a moment she thought he might walk away. But he didn't. He just looked at her. Steady, and it hurt. Because what she saw in his face wasn't rejection. It was torment to your brother, he said, his voice low. "Joshua died trusting me, and you think he'd rather see me unhappy? Alone? Pretending I feel nothing? I think he wouldn't have chosen this," Aiden replied with a certain harshness. "I'm the man who promised to take care of you, not to fall in love with you." The words lingered in the air, heavy. He had said it clearly, fall in love. "So you admit it," she whispered. "You feel it. I'm a man, Crystal. Of course I feel it, the way you talk, the way you look at me, the smell of your hair after a shower, that laugh you let out when you win at cards, the way your body curls up on the couch, legs tucked, face buried in the pillow. Everything about you hits me, but I can't. I shouldn't." She took a deep breath, stepped closer, and then he didn't move. "Then why are you still here?" He took a long time to answer. "Because I love you, but I still don't know if that's right." Crystal lowered her gaze. Her chest was heavy, eyes burning. But there was something else there. Something new. She touched his arm lightly, voice steady. "I don't want right. I want you," but he didn't answer. He just looked at her, as if carving that moment into his soul, to carry the weight of that choice. That night, Aiden went out for a run, ran harder than his body could take, harder than the pavement could hold, as if through the pounding of his steps, he could purge the desire that had settled where promises said it shouldn't. Sweat dripped from his temples, breath uneven, shoes muddy from damp earth. But nothing helped, because it wasn't his body that was tired. It was his mind. He got home under a dark sky and saw the living room light on. Crystal was on the couch in socks, holding a mug in both hands like it was the last warm thing in the world. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. He just sat beside her, not touching, and they stayed like that, like two planets in orbit, always close, always too dangerous to collide. Graduation came a few days later. Crystal walked the stage in a flowing dress, hair in a messy bun, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on his. Aiden sat in the middle row. Dark shirt, gray blazer, arms crossed over his chest, and that half-smile she knew so well. When they called her name, she took a deep breath, but not for the diploma. She breathed for him, for Joshua, because it was for him that she wanted to become someone worth being. After the ceremony, classmates clustered in noisy groups, cameras flashing, champagne popping. Crystal walked up to Aiden. "You came," she said, eyes shining with a light the wind couldn't put out. "I promised I'd be here," he replied, adjusting her necklace the way he always did without thinking. "And you looked beautiful up there." She held his wrist, a touch that lasted half a second too long. And down here? Crystal, he whispered, her name dripping from his lips like something that burned. I don't want you to say anything now. I just wanted to know if you thought of me today, yesterday, what it would be like if I hadn't made a promise? He finished. She nodded softly. He looked at her like the whole world stood between them. And maybe it did, because nothing about him was shallow. Aiden was the kind of man who, when he let himself feel, felt with the weight of the world on his shoulders. I do think about it, he confessed. I think too much. And that's exactly why. I can't. Crystal didn't insist. Didn't make a scene. She just smiled. You're the only man I've ever met who makes me want to wait. Not for words, but for truth, he didn't respond. He didn't have to. Aiden wasn't made of declarations. He was made of gestures. Summer brought more nights in the backyard, improvised dinners, TV shows watched on the couch with feet unintentionally intertwined. They crossed paths in the hallways of the house, sometimes with towels slung over shoulders, sometimes in wrinkled clothes and books in hand. And every glance was a tightrope stretched between now and never. One night she asked, "Why do you still live here?" Aiden took his time to answer. "Because it's still my place. But sometimes, it feels like I'm trapped in a room I locked from the inside." She didn't get it right away. Locked why? He stared out the window. "Because loving you feels wrong, even when everything in me screams it's right." Crystal felt her stomach drop, but she didn't back down. "Do you love me? Not like a brother," that he said. "Not like a guardian. Not like anything safe." She stepped closer, touched his hand, but he pulled away. "We can't, Crystal. I'm what's left of Joshua for you." She shook her head. "No, you're you. And I fell in love with who you are, not with who you represent." Aiden was fighting his own reflection. He saw Joshua in every corner of the house. In the frames, the old belongings, the memories. But he saw Crystal as she was now, a woman, not just the little sister of his best friend. "I need time," he said, like it was the last shield he had left. She nodded. "I'll give you time, but I won't pretend I don't feel it. And when you're ready, I'll be here." After she went to bed, Aiden stayed in the kitchen. He ran his hand over the countertop where they'd laughed, argued, shared so many mornings. Joshua had trusted him, and he'd done everything right for so long. But now every gesture was a live wire. He knew he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and deep down, a part of him had already jumped. "I need to travel." The words came out as Crystal rinsed a mug in the kitchen sink, hot water running between her fingers. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished rinsing, dried her hands on the towel hanging next to the fridge, and only then looked at him. "Travel where?" "East Coast. New project. The company partnered with a group of investors in Boston. I'll supervise the installation of the units and train the new strategic design team." "For how long?" 2 months. This time she turned fully to him. Her eyes, once calm, now searched his face for something. But Aiden looked away, shoved his hands into his pockets, the way he always did when he was about to lie. Not about facts, but about intentions. 2 months is a long time. "It'll go by fast. And we'll talk. Every day if you want." He tried to smile, but it faltered halfway, like everything about him lately. She didn't answer. Not with words. She only nodded slowly and left the kitchen with restrained steps like something had broken. And she didn't want to hear the sound. The trip wasn't just work. It was escape. Aiden knew it even before he packed. Every folded shirt, every carefully chosen book, every pair of shoes neatly placed in the suitcase was a nearly desperate attempt to keep his mind busy. To create distance, to breathe far away from Crystal's scent, her laughter echoing through the hallway. The way she looked at him when she truly laughed. That unguarded laugh, from deep in her chest that dismantled any resistance. But he resisted. The weeks on the East Coast dragged on through technical meetings, spreadsheets no one could care about, and coffee that felt weaker than the ones Crystal made. He replied to her messages with British punctuality. Asked if she was eating well, if she remembered to lock the front door, if she still fell asleep listening to music. She replied with emojis, short audios, photos of the cat that started visiting the porch every day. But there were gaps, long gaps between messages. Spaces where what needed to be said was exactly what neither of them could write. One night, after a dragged-out meeting, Aiden left the hotel and wandered the damp streets of Boston like a man looking for oxygen in a concrete jungle. The city was beautiful, vibrant, full of possibilities, but none of it compared to the muffled laugh Crystal made when she burned the toast, or the way she stacked books on the couch saying she'd put them away later, and never did, or the way she made him feel. Present. That night, Aiden skipped dinner, went straight to his room, took a cold shower, and collapsed on the bed, eyes burning. It wasn't just longing. It was conflict. It was the kind of love that didn't have a name. It was the memory of a promise made beside a coffin, of a pain they once shared, of a wound still bleeding. Joshua would kill me for this, he whispered into the dark. And then, with a tight throat, hands covering his face and body curled like he was mid-fall, Aiden asked for forgiveness. In a whisper, "I'm sorry, brother. I swear I tried. I swear." He fell asleep like that, unguarded, and he dreamed. Joshua stood on a porch lit by the soft glow of sunset, wearing that black shirt he used to wear when he wanted to impress on dates. Arms crossed, that crooked smirk, the same one he used when he knew he was right before an argument even began. "Took you long enough," Aiden blinked, confused. Seeing his friend didn't hurt. Strangely, it eased something. This is a dream. Of course it is. I'm dead, remember? Aiden swallowed hard. Joshua moved closer, leaning against the railing beside him, just like they'd done countless times on the porch back home. The wind stirred the trees with a softness that didn't exist in the real world. Everything there was calm, untouched by gravity or grief. "I thought you'd hate me for loving her?" Aiden didn't answer. Joshua gave a short laugh. "You were always terrible with feelings." "I fought it, Josh, I tried." "I know, but she..." Joshua looked out at the horizon. "She's never been better. You're home to her, Aiden. You're solid ground. And she's that for you too. Don't fight it. But I trusted you to take care of her, not to freeze your lives out of guilt for me." He turned, meeting Aiden's eyes with quiet firmness. "Crystal deserves to be loved completely. And you're the only one I'd ever trust to do it. I'm scared. I would be too. But she's worth the risk." Aiden lowered his head. Joshua placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take care of her. Not as a promise, as love." When Aiden looked up again, his friend was gone. The wind still blew softly. The golden light lingered, but Joshua had left, and with him, part of the weight. Aiden woke in the middle of the night, breath uneven, chest damp with tears he hadn't realized he'd shed. It took him a few seconds to understand where he was. The hotel, the dark room, the distant hum of traffic. But something inside him had changed. Solid. Certain what had once been doubt was now urgency. He picked up his phone, opened his gallery. A photo of her. Messy hair, oversized sweatshirt, distracted smile. And he thought, "I'm going home." The flight left at 6 a.m. Aiden didn't sleep again. He packed his suitcase with the same care he had when leaving, but this time not to run. Every folded shirt felt like reclaiming clarity, decision. It wasn't just about wanting Crystal. It was about understanding that denying it would betray everything they'd built together in Joshua's absence. And more than that, it would dishonor the way he had loved and trusted them both. The plane took off under a gray sky, slicing through thick clouds as if tearing past the last remnants of fear. Crystal was in the kitchen when she heard the key turn in the lock. The sound was familiar, but not the hour. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. "What?" The door opened, and he stepped inside. The suitcase beside him. That steady gaze. She froze for a moment as if her mind needed time to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. "Aiden, I'm back." "What? Why? Wasn't the project supposed to last 2 months?" He took a step toward her, then stopped, still standing between two worlds. "I didn't just go to work, Crystal. I went to try to forget." She said nothing. I tried to get you out of my head. I buried myself in spreadsheets, meetings, miles of highway, convincing myself it was confusion, guilt, fear. But it wasn't. Her eyes welled with tears. She was still holding a spoon, the coffee jar lid left open on the counter. "And now?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Now I know." He took off his shoes, set his keys on the table by the door, and crossed the room like every step was a reckoning. I know it's not wrong to love you, because I've never loved anyone with this kind of truth, with this kind of care, with this kind of presence. Crystal felt her breath catch. But Joshua, Aiden stopped in front of her. There was a weight in his eyes, not of guilt anymore, but of the responsibility carried by someone who'd lived with it for far too long. I dreamed of him, he said, voice steady. He told me to take care of you. Not out of promise. Out of love. She brought a hand to her mouth. A muffled sob escaped. It wasn't pain, it was relief. You dreamed of Joshua? I don't know if it was a dream or a memory or just longing. All I know is, he looked at me and said you were my home, that you deserved to be loved fully, that he trusted me to do that. Crystal let the spoon fall into the sink. She walked toward him, stopped inches away. I missed you. Every day. But more than that, I started to feel something else. I know. I tried to fight it. Because loving you felt wrong in my mind, like I was betraying his memory, but loving you also saved me. He touched her face gently, as if time itself was being erased between them with that gesture. She closed her eyes, leaning into his hand. What if we fall apart? She whispered. Then we try, and try again. Because what I feel for you isn't reckless passion, Crystal. It's something that grew. Through pain, through loss, through everyday life. It's love that was built. Real. Rooted. She pulled him by the shirt as if the world might collapse if she didn't touch him right then. Then love me right. I don't know how to love any other way, and then he kissed her. The kiss wasn't rushed. It was intimate, slow, like one discovering sacred ground. Their hands found each other reverently, their bodies aligned as if they already knew the way. And there in the kitchen that had hidden so much grief, love found a voice. It wasn't explosive. It was acceptance. It was the peace that comes when two hearts stop fighting each other and start fighting for each other. That night, she fell asleep with her head on his chest. His heart beat steady, his breathing calm. Aiden ran his fingers through her hair like a man giving thanks for coming back in time. Outside, the wind rustled the backyard trees. Inside the house, for the first time in so long, there was something stronger than absence. There was presence. There was love. There was a promise, not of pain, but of beginning again. And in that moment, they both knew, no matter how long it took or what still lay ahead, they had chosen each other, and that changed everything. Crystal never imagined love could have a scent, but every morning since Aiden came back, she'd wake before the alarm and feel it. The smell of him. Fresh coffee mixed with clean soap and something that was just him. Something she couldn't name but would recognize in the dark. Aiden was methodical about mornings. While she was still wrapped in the blankets, he was already up, shirt half-buttoned, phone wedged between his shoulder and face while replying to emails and making toast just the way she liked. Butter and strawberry jam. You work too much, she said once, walking into the kitchen with pillow marks still on her face. You sleep too much. He shot back, not even looking, but with that half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I'm an artist, creative. Creative people have confusing schedules. You work with me now, Crystal. You're a professional designer. All that's left is learning how to use a planner. She made a face. Intern. Who fetches coffee, prints blueprints, and gets fake smiles from women who clearly want to sit on your lap. Are you jealous? No, I'm just observing, he laughed. And that sound filled the kitchen like a private soundtrack. That's how it had been since everything changed. The teasing had become routine. The touches now had meaning. He'd run his hand along her shoulder to grab a pen. She adjusted his tie before meetings. And at night, on the couch, their feet always ended up tangled, even if each had a laptop in their lap. But there was more than that. There was time. There was care. Crystal now worked part-time at the firm where Aiden was a partner. She started shy, as if stepping onto ground that wasn't hers. But soon she won everyone over with sharp wit and refined aesthetic. Aiden, however, kept a strictly professional distance. No special treatment. No loopholes for rumors except in the elevator. There sometimes his hand would slide to her waist like he was whispering, "You are my home." One afternoon after a draining meeting, she barged into his office without knocking. She kicked the door closed with her hip and dropped a pile of revised layouts on his desk. You should win an award. For what? For hiding so well that you're melting for me. He dropped the pen, spun the chair, and flashed the smile only she knew. I'm not hiding. You're not? I'm holding back. What's the difference? Hiding is pretending you don't feel anything. Holding back is feeling everything and still not acting on it. She held her breath for half a second. His eyes were molten steel laced with desire, but there was no rush, no hunger, just certainty. That's so sexy, she murmured. I know. That night when they got home, she walked straight past the kitchen, went up to the bedroom and came back down in one of his shirts. You're not going to complain I steal your clothes? Only when you start stealing my suits. Noted? He pulled her by the waist, their bodies aligned in the middle of the hallway. Their lips almost touched, but she tilted her head and bit the corner of his jaw. Are you teasing me? I am pure provocation. You're dangerous, and you look like the kind of man who enjoys living dangerously. They laughed together. That kind of laugh that only comes after shared pain, respected silences, and untold stories the body learns to read over time. Of course, not everything was laughter. Sometimes Joshua would show up in the conversation without warning. He hated when the butter got mixed with the jelly on the knife, Crystal commented one morning, staring at the open jar. Aiden smiled at the memory, and he hated it even more when we put our feet on the coffee table. But you always did it, because I like to annoy him. Crystal sat at the table and wrapped both hands around her mug. I dreamed about him again this week. Really? She nodded. He was laughing. But he didn't say anything. He just looked at us. Aiden looked at her for a moment longer than usual. He didn't need to say a word. He knew Joshua still lived there, in the pictures, in the framed photos scattered around, in the inherited mugs, in the old sweatshirt Crystal still wore on cold days. And that was okay. Joshua wasn't a shadow. He was a root. The office was hectic that week. New project, demanding client, insane deadlines. Crystal performed brilliantly, pointing out mistakes, suggesting solutions, organizing timelines. You've built a star, Aiden's partner said over lunch. She always was. She just needed space to shine. On the day the project was delivered, Crystal got home exhausted, kicked off her shoes at the door, and collapsed on the couch with a long sigh. I want a vacation, Bahamas, or at least 2 days without spreadsheets. I could take you to a hotel in the countryside, peace, a fireplace. White sheets? Will you be there? Always, she smiled. She threw herself into his lap and hugged him tightly. Thank you for pushing me when I wanted to stop. For lifting me up when all I wanted was to lie down and cry. I just did what your brother taught me, and you surpassed even him. He looked at her with tenderness, but with a quiet certainty. Joshua will always be our compass. But now, we're the ones drawing the map. Crystal rested her head on his shoulder. There, on the couch, between soft lights and silent promises, they understood what they were building. It wasn't just a relationship, it was a home. And still there was room for teasing. One Sunday, Crystal walked in wearing a t-shirt that read, I'm dating my boss, and he's hot. Crystal, what? I'm trying to maintain professional composure here, and I'm trying to show the world you're a total heartthrob. We've both got our missions. He couldn't take it. He laughed out loud, kissed her forehead, and said, You're a hopeless case. Lucky for you, I'm your hopeless case, and they were. Hopelessly lost in each other, in laughter, in touch, in time, in the memory of who was gone, in the certainty of who had stayed, and above all, in the courage to keep going. Time never asked for permission. It didn't explain. It simply passed. But when Crystal looked at Aiden sleeping beside her, his arm draped over the small curve of her belly, now softly rising beneath the sheets, she understood. Some things time doesn't take. Some things it only transforms. They had been married a little over a year. There hadn't been a grand celebration or vows spoken before crowds. The ceremony was small, intimate, in a garden where smiles mattered more than rows of chairs. Crystal walked in wearing a light dress, her hair loosely tied, and in her eyes was the same certainty that had guided Aiden since the day he came back from that trip 2 months after running away. And realizing that running from her meant running from his own soul, the pregnancy came as a gift they hadn't known they were ready for. but they were. Crystal found out on an ordinary Saturday morning. With the smell of coffee and sunlight slanting through the window, she stood in silence for long minutes staring at the test on the counter. Her heart beat in places she didn't even know existed, and suddenly she felt it. Joshua would be happy, and in some way, he was still there. That night, she made Aiden's favorite dish, lemon shrimp pasta, exactly the way Joshua used to. Aiden got suspicious after the second bite. "You're treating me too well. Or you want to tell me something. Or you did something to my car." Crystal laughed, nervous. Then she placed a small white envelope beside his plate. Aiden opened it. Inside, the ultrasound. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at her. Then at the image. Then at her again. "Is this real?" His voice broke like it didn't fit inside his body. She nodded, eyes gleaming. Aiden stood up, walked around the table and knelt in front of her. He kissed her belly with a tenderness that didn't need spectacle. "You just gave me the universe," he whispered. "And I'll take care of you both with everything I have." The months went by in a blur of name lists, sleepless nights of anticipation, paint color choices, and whispered conversations at 3 a.m. Crystal kept working as a designer at Aiden's firm, now sharing not only projects and ideas, but dreams. It was a calm pregnancy, though the baby already showed signs of inheriting his parents' stubbornness. In every ultrasound, he turned his back as if keeping secrets. Until the day the doctor, under the sound of a corny playlist Aiden had chosen, "The baby needs musical culture straight from the womb," smiled at the monitor. "Want to know the gender?" Crystal looked at Aiden. He smiled, that crooked boyish smile only she knew. "If it's a girl, she'll be as charming as her mother. If it's a boy, he'll be my best friend." The doctor pointed and said, "It's a boy," Crystal cried. Aiden held her hand, his eyes glistening. Later in the car, he kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was quiet, heavy with meaning. "I've been thinking of a name." She turned to him, curious. "Which one?" He took a deep breath, fingers tightening gently around the wheel. "Joshua." The world seemed to stop for a second. Crystal felt her heartbeat quicken, the air grow dense around her. "Aiden, it's not just for me, and not just for him. It's for us. He was the beginning of everything, Crystal, and he still is." She lifted a trembling hand to her face, tears gliding over her smile. "Joshua will live in every step that boy takes. He'll be love, strength, roots." She smiled through the tears. "Then Joshua it is." And that's how the name returned to that house. Not as longing, but as legacy, as love in motion. In the final stretch of the pregnancy, Aiden had become a mix of responsible architect and neurotic dad. He installed cameras, checked tire pressure, tested the house alarm 3 times before bed. Crystal laughed. "Love. The baby's not going to take the car out for a spin in the middle of the night, but he'll be born into a world I can't control. So at least in here, he'll have everything I can give." When the contractions began, it was the middle of the night. Aiden was on the couch reviewing a project on his laptop. She appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed, wearing an expression somewhere between panic and sarcasm. "I think your mini best friend wants out." Aiden tripped over the rug, nearly dropped his phone, forgot where he'd left the baby's hospital bag, then forgot hers. In the car, he drove like he was transporting a crystal vase inside a race car. The labor was long, intense. But when the baby's cry filled the room, Aiden cried too, with his soul, with every inch of his body. Crystal, exhausted, reached out her arms for their son and whispered, "Welcome, Joshua." The baby opened his eyes for a brief moment. And in that moment, time didn't stop as if frozen. It paused in reverence, as if recognizing that name now carried a legacy, a story, a promise fulfilled. In the days that followed, the house filled with new sounds. Crying, laughter, the scent of warm milk and baby lotion, but it also filled with something else. Peace. Crystal would watch Aiden rocking their son in the porch chair and understand, with an almost sacred calm, that she had found more than love. She had found where she truly belonged. Aiden, for his part, felt he had fulfilled a promise. He had cared for Crystal, loved Crystal, and now, with that small bundle in his arms, he felt that Joshua had never really left. He was there, in the name whispered in the night, in the baby's smile as he slept. the stubborn little frown that mirrored his uncle's. One crisp autumn morning, Crystal found Aiden in the nursery. He stood silently looking at the crib. Joshua slept deeply. Up so early? Just remembering him, he said softly. Remembering what? Everything. Who I was before you, before him, before all of this, and how, even after the most devastating loss of our lives, God gave it all back to us. In a different way, but whole. Crystal stepped closer, wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her cheek against the broad back that had always felt like home. Do you think he's seeing all of this? She asked quietly. Aiden turned slowly, touched her face like he was still trying to believe it was all real. He's here every day, in us, in our son, in the love we built from the ruins of what we once thought we'd never survive. She smiled, kissed his chest right over his heart. And that morning, with the sun filtering through the curtains and the world spinning outside, unaware of what was happening within, Crystal understood. Some sins are merely loves that arrived at the wrong time, and decided to stay until the right time came. And now it had, forever. In the house where she first came as someone's little sister, she had become the love of his life. What would you do if the love of your life was the one mistake you swore you'd never make? Tell me in the comments what part of this story touched you the most. Your comment, your like, and the hype you leave on this video mean the world. They help this channel grow and keep bringing you more intense, unforgettable love stories. Subscribe to the channel, share this story with someone who still believes in a love that defies fate, and get ready, because there's so much more to come.